I never thought I'd become the person who took down our neighborhood's self-appointed dictator, but sometimes life puts you in situations where you have to stand your ground. It all started on a crisp autumn morning when I was enjoying my coffee on the back porch of my small ranch property. I'd saved for years to buy this modest 3-acre plot at the edge of Willow Creek Estates, a nice community with reasonable HOA guidelines that mostly focused on keeping common areas maintained. I nearly choked on my coffee when I spotted movement at the far corner of my property. Someone was digging a large hole about 10 feet inside my fence line. I set down my mug and walked over, expecting perhaps a utility worker who'd forgotten to notify me. Instead, I found Marjorie Kensington, the most notorious resident in our community, driving a shovel into my soil with determined fury. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "What are you doing on my property?" Marjorie straightened up, wiping sweat from her brow with a gardening glove. "This isn't your property," she said with absolute conviction. "This area belongs to me. I'm putting in a butterfly garden." I was momentarily stunned by her confidence. "Marjorie, the property line is clearly marked by the survey stakes. You're about 10 feet onto my land." She laughed dismissively. "Your survey is wrong. I've been on the HOA board for 15 years, and I know exactly where the boundaries are. This section has always been part of my extended yard. I have the official survey documents," I explained calmly. "They were completed when I purchased the property last year. This is definitely my land, and I need you to stop digging immediately." Her face hardened. "Well, I'm going to file a complaint with the HOA about your aggressive behavior. And that fence of yours is 6 inches too high according to regulations." As she stormed off, shovel in hand, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. I'd heard stories about Marjorie from other neighbors, but this was my first direct confrontation. Little did I know this would be the opening salvo in a war I never wanted to fight. When I first moved to Willow Creek Estates, I was charmed by the peaceful community. Most of my neighbors were friendly, down-to-earth people who respected boundaries and helped each other out. I'd spent weekends fixing up the modest ranch house and tending to my small vegetable garden. I kept my property neat, followed the actual HOA guidelines, and quickly made friends with several neighbors who appreciated my homemade zucchini bread. But Marjorie Kensington was different. She lived in the largest house in the community for nearly 2 decades and had appointed herself the unofficial enforcer of rules, both real and imagined. My neighbor Tom had warned me about her during a backyard barbecue shortly after I moved in. "Watch out for Marjorie," he'd said quietly. "She's been on and off the HOA board for years, but even when she's not officially serving, she acts like she has authority." She drove the Hendersons away last year with constant complaints about their children's treehouse. Other neighbors shared similar stories. Marjorie had reported elderly Mrs. Winters for having a bird feeder that attracted vermin. She called the city on the Patels for parking their boat in their driveway overnight, though it was perfectly legal. She seemed to delight in finding violations and wielding power, real or imagined. I'd hoped to fly under her radar, but the confrontation over the hole in my yard changed everything. The day after our encounter, I found a printed notice taped to my front door. It looked official at first glance, with "violation notice" printed in bold red letters across the top, but closer inspection revealed it wasn't from the actual HOA. It was from Neighborhood Compliance Committee, an entity that didn't exist in our official community documents. The notice cited me for aggressive confrontation with a neighbor and fence height violation, demanding a $150 compliance processing fee to be paid directly to Marjorie as the committee chairperson. I took photos of the notice and then removed it, shaking my head at the absurdity. 3 days later, another notice appeared, this one claiming my garden beds were unsightly and demanding I remove them within 48 hours. The following week, she left a notice about my mailbox being non-conforming, though it matched every other mailbox on the street. Each notice included escalating fees and increasingly threatening language. I began to document everything. I took photos of each notice, recorded dates and times, and started keeping a detailed journal of every interaction. I also installed a security camera system that covered my property boundaries. Something told me I might need evidence later. Marjorie's campaign intensified when she realized I wasn't responding to her notices or paying her fabricated fees. She began taking photos of my property from the street, sometimes standing there for 20 minutes, documenting imaginary violations. When I would wave politely, she would quickly look away, pretending she hadn't seen me. One evening, I returned home to find Marjorie talking to another neighbor in front of my house, gesturing wildly toward my roof. As I approached, I overheard her saying, "The shingle color was never approved." He's going to have to replace the entire roof. Good evening, I said pleasantly. Is there something about my roof that concerns you, Marjorie? The other neighbor looked embarrassed and quickly excused herself. Marjorie, however, stood her ground. Your roof shingles are midnight gray, she said accusingly. The approved color for this section is charcoal gray. It's completely different. Actually, I replied, I have the approval documentation from the actual HOA Architectural Committee. They approved these exact shingles. Would you like to see the paperwork? Her face flushed. Well, they made a mistake then. I'll be bringing this up at the next meeting. The situation continued to deteriorate. Marjorie began telling other neighbors that I was a troublemaker who didn't respect community standards. She left printed flyers on mailboxes warning about new residents who think they're above the rules. She never named me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. I maintained my composure through it all, continuing to document her behavior while going about my life. I made a point of being extra friendly with other neighbors, helping when I could and participating in community events. Most people could see what was happening and offered sympathetic glances or quiet words of support. She did the same thing to us when we first moved in, confided Sarah from 2 doors down. She eventually moved on to someone else when we didn't react. But Marjorie didn't move on from me. If anything, my calm response seemed to infuriate her further. The breaking point came 6 months after the initial confrontation over the hole in my yard. I returned home from work one day to find a section of my fence had been damaged. The posts had been loosened, and a portion was leaning inward. As I examined the damage, I noticed fresh footprints in the soft soil footprints made by the distinctive gardening clogs Marjorie always wore. My security cameras had captured the whole thing. The footage clearly showed Marjorie approaching my fence with a shovel, digging around the posts, and deliberately pushing against the fence until it began to give way. She had crossed the line from harassment to vandalism. I was still reviewing the footage when a police car pulled into my driveway. 2 officers approached, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Sir, we received a call about a property dispute, one officer explained. A Ms. Kensington claims you've built a fence on her property and became threatening when she tried to remove it. I took a deep breath. Officers, I'd be happy to show you my property survey, which clearly shows the fence is well within my boundary. I'd also like to show you security footage of Ms. Kensington vandalizing my fence less than 2 hours ago. The officers reviewed my documentation and watched the video footage. Their expressions changed from professional neutrality to poorly concealed disbelief. Sir, it appears Ms. Kensington may have filed a false report, the senior officer said. Would you like to press charges for the damage to your fence? I considered for a moment. Not at this time. But I would like this incident documented officially. As the officers were preparing to leave, Marjorie herself came marching up my driveway, looking triumphant. Her expression faltered when she saw the officers speaking amicably with me instead of arresting me as she'd clearly hoped. Officers, did he show you how he's encroaching on my property? She demanded. Ma'am, the senior officer said firmly, we've reviewed the property survey and documentation. The fence is clearly on Mr. Johnson's property. We've also viewed video evidence of you damaging the fence earlier today. Marjorie's face went pale, then quickly flushed with anger. That's impossible. He must have doctored the footage. I'm the head of the Neighborhood Compliance Committee. Ma'am, the officer replied, we're not aware of any official entity by that name. The officers have confirmed with the registered HOA that no such committee exists. Filing a false police report is a serious offense. Mr. Johnson has declined to press charges for the vandalism at this time, but I strongly suggest you cease contact with him and stay off his property. After the police left, Marjorie stood at the edge of my driveway, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. This isn't over, she hissed before storming off. She was right about that, but not in the way she imagined. What Marjorie didn't know was that I wasn't just a homeowner who happened to keep good records. Before moving to Willow Creek Estates, I had worked for 15 years as a paralegal specializing in property disputes and homeowners association law. I knew exactly what constituted harassment, false authority, and illegal enforcement. I had been building a case methodically since our first encounter. The day after the fence incident, I contacted the legitimate HOA board and requested an emergency meeting to address ongoing harassment by a resident. I had prepared a comprehensive dossier, photos of every fake violation notice, video clips of Marjorie trespassing on my property, statements from 5 other neighbors who had experienced similar harassment, and documentation of her misrepresenting herself as an official authority. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Marjorie escalated further. She placed a large sign at the entrance to our community that read, "Residents beware. Property line thief on Willow Lane," with an arrow pointing toward my house. She distributed more flyers, now explicitly naming me and accusing me of threatening her. She even called my workplace and spoke to my supervisor, claiming I was under investigation for property violations. By the time the HOA meeting arrived, nearly every resident in Willow Creek Estates had experienced or witnessed Marjorie's campaign against me. The community room at our local library was packed, with people standing along the walls. Marjorie arrived early, sitting in the front row with a thick folder I assumed contained her evidence against me. The board president, a retired judge named Mr. Harmon, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address complaints of harassment and misrepresentation of authority within our community," he began. "Mr. Johnson has filed a formal complaint with substantial documentation, which the board has reviewed. Ms. Kensington, you have been named in this complaint. You'll have an opportunity to respond after Mr. Johnson presents his case." I calmly walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence I had gathered. I showed the progression of fake violation notices, the video of Marjorie vandalizing my fence, and the police report documenting her false claims. I presented statements from other residents describing similar harassment. I explained how she had created a fictitious committee to give herself the appearance of authority. In conclusion, I said, Ms. Kensington has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and impersonation of HOA authority. She has created a hostile living environment not just for me, but for many community members. I am requesting that the board take appropriate action to ensure this behavior stops immediately. The room was silent as I returned to my seat. Marjorie stood up, visibly shaking with anger. "This is all lies and manipulation," she declared. "I've lived here for 18 years and served on this board multiple times. I know the rules better than anyone. He's the one who's been aggressive and threatening. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" Mr. Harmon asked. "I don't need evidence. Everyone knows I've always protected the standards of this community." She began rifling through her folder, pulling out papers at random. "I have copies of all the violations I've documented. His fence is too high. His garden is unsightly. His roof is the wrong color." Mr. Harmon interrupted gently. "Ms. Kensington, are these official HOA violations or notices from your neighborhood compliance committee?" She hesitated. "What difference does it make? Someone has to enforce the rules. The difference," Mr. Harmon explained, "is that one is legitimate and the other is not. This board has not authorized you or any committee to issue violation notices or collect fees." What followed was difficult to watch. Marjorie became increasingly agitated, accusing the board of conspiring against her, claiming other residents were afraid to speak up in her defense. When no one did, her accusations became more desperate and disconnected from reality. Finally, Mr. Harmon called for order. "The board will now deliberate and issue a decision," he announced, and the board members moved to a separate room. They returned 15 minutes later. Mr. Harmon cleared his throat and addressed the room. "After reviewing the evidence presented, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Ms. Kensington has clearly violated multiple provisions of our community bylaws and possibly several laws. The board hereby issues the following directives. First, Ms. Kensington must immediately cease all harassment of Mr. Johnson and other residents. Second, she must stop representing herself as having any official authority to issue violations or collect fees. Third, she must remove all signs and cease distributing materials that defame any resident." He paused, looking directly at Marjorie. "Furthermore, the board is referring this matter to legal counsel to determine appropriate restitution for damages. We are also notifying authorities regarding the potentially fraudulent collection of fees from residents." This meeting is adjourned. The aftermath was both swift and satisfying. Marjorie was served with a cease and desist order from the HOA's attorney the following day. When investigators discovered she had collected over $7,000 in fake compliance fees from various residents over the years, she was charged with fraud. The district attorney also pursued charges for filing false police reports, vandalism, and criminal harassment. Marjorie eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution to all affected residents, community service, and a restraining order that prevented her from contacting me or several other neighbors she had targeted. 6 months later, her house went on the market, and she moved away from Willow Creek Estates. The community transformed after Marjorie's departure. Neighbors who had kept to themselves out of fear began participating in community events. Children played more freely in front yards. Several residents who had been planning to move decided to stay. At the next HOA election, a diverse group of thoughtful, reasonable people volunteered to serve on the board. As for me, I finally completed the butterfly garden in the corner of my property, the very spot where Marjorie had been digging that fateful day. It became a beautiful space with native plants that attracted monarchs and swallowtails. I added a small bench where I could sit and enjoy the peaceful surroundings. One evening, as I was watering the butterfly garden, my neighbor Tom came by with a bottle of wine. "I think we should celebrate," he said, holding up the bottle. 1 year of peace and quiet. We sat on my porch as the sun set, sipping wine and chatting about neighborhood improvements. "You know," Tom said thoughtfully, "what you did wasn't just for yourself. You helped a lot of people who were too intimidated to stand up to her." I smiled. "I just documented everything and told the truth. The system worked the way it was supposed to. Well, we're all grateful. Cheers to quiet enjoyment of our properties." We clinked glasses as butterflies danced over the garden. I felt no malice toward Marjorie, just relief that reason had prevailed and peace had returned to our community. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's simply about restoring balance and allowing people to live their lives without fear. And in that sense, justice had been perfectly served. Total _char_count, 27,341.